I'm making a turn-based RPG with perfect information availability, no randomness, no grinding, and a story about trauma that is deeply personal to me. I talked about my plans and motivation in more detail in the first episode, so I won't repeat myself here. At the end of the last episode, I said that I was going to start over in monogame with C#, but why? I decided that it's important to me that a console port is eventually possible, which C# can do. On its own, that's not a good reason to start over. Shipping the game at all in the first place is much more important than a console port that might not even happen. But when I tried out C# to see what it was like, I actually found myself liking it a lot. It has so many really nice features, more than I could even mention here. Its magnitude's more pleasant to use than anything I've tried before. It was pretty overwhelming at first, but after I spent a few days reading through the entirety of the docs and creating my own mini-docs to deepen my understanding, it started to feel like a second skin. Despite its complexity, it clicked into place eerily easily. Said mini-docs are available on my website if you're so inclined. No guarantee of accuracy, completeness, or usefulness is made. The first thing that I wanted to do was port the debug overlay, which necessitated that I draw text to the screen. libgdx has a built-in label class that contains text with a location, alignment, and various other properties, but monogame only provides a method to draw a string. I had to create a label class with alignment calculation and such myself. I found a library called font-sharp that provides some nice functionality like multicolored text, embedded images, and dynamic atlas generation from a TTF file. It's nowhere near as powerful as TextureTypist, but it should have everything that I actually need. The function that embeds images in text is not implemented by default, so I had to implement it myself. I couldn't figure out how to get it to scale the image, so I guess I'm just only going to put images in one size of text. libgdx lang uses properties files, but monogame lang uses resx files, which is a derivative of XML. The syntax for adding colors and images to text is also different. I wrote a script to convert my existing lang file, and it dropped into place easily. Resx files generate classes with helper properties on build, and it was working fine at first, but at some point this stopped working for some reason. I have yet to fix it. I was using something called choice format for complicated parameter-dependent formatting, but choice format only exists in Java. However, it turns out that Java's choice format is a bespoke variant of ICU message format for which a C# library does exist, so it wasn't difficult to convert. Java's choice format doesn't support nested choices, and it also has slightly more cursed syntax, so this is overall an improvement. In the original version of the game, I made the mistake of storing translated lang keys in a lot of places, which means you'd have to restart the game to change the language. I'm being more careful to only store raw keys this time, and translate them as needed. There are some cases where this is really difficult, such as when the key requires a bunch of other information to form the final translated string. While I was working on this, I stumbled across a page on Microsoft's website describing something called Java Text Message Format, which feels very cursed. All of the formatting on the page is completely broken. I can't imagine that anyone besides me has looked at this page in many years. The next thing I decided to make was the Modloader. I was originally planning to save it for last, but if I'm designing it from the beginning, I can ensure that the game is easy to mod, and I won't have to refactor things later. I can also code the base game content as a mod for itself, which means that I'll notice any problems, and that a modder could replace it with something entirely different. I created an interface, iGameMod, which your mod's main class has to implement. An interface is a contract that you follow, so when you implement iGameMod, the Modloader knows that you fit a certain shape, and it can invoke the initialize method with confidence that it's there. I'll make this more advanced later, but for now this is fine. I have successfully added arbitrary code execution to my game. That's what every developer wants, right? I create a base mod and try adding content from it. It doesn't work. Oh right, when I build, it doesn't actually get put into the mods folder. I just have to add a build action that moves the file automatically. You may have noticed that this only moves the file if the condition publish AOT is false. What is that and why? C# is by default a JIT language. That stands for just-in-time compilation. It means that instead of compiling to machine code, C# compiles to an intermediate format, and when the end user launches the game, their computer compiles the intermediate format into machine code. This has several advantages. I don't need to ship separate builds for every platform. I don't need to use a Mac to release the game for Mac OS, and in theory you can sometimes get better performance because the JIT can optimize for your exact computer. In practice, performance is generally worse than if it was compiled to machine code ahead of time purely because the JIT doesn't have as much time. Relevantly, JIT enables loading arbitrary code at runtime. Languages that compile directly to machine code, like C++, have a much harder time doing this because most of the information about any code you'd be loading has been stripped away, which is why games written in those languages usually use a scripting language like Lua for modding. However, C# can be compiled to machine code ahead of time by enabling publish AOT, and this is necessary in order to run on consoles. And with AOT enabled, my Modloader doesn't work because it relies on dynamic code loading. This is a simple fix. All I have to do is use conditional compilation. If AOT is disabled, run the Modloader. Otherwise, statically invoke my mod. I can do this because I know exactly where it is at compile time, but this wouldn't work for arbitrary mods. Next, I ported my code to draw animated outlined parallelograms for the menu. Let me walk you through the process of doing this so you can get an idea of what a day of development is like. First, I had to figure out how to draw a triangle. I found a tutorial on something called Basic Effect, followed it, and bam, triangle, easy. Then I found a tutorial on how to enable anti-aliasing for it, followed it, and bam, game crashed. Let me try that again, now it just does nothing. I wasted a lot of time fighting with this before I gave up. Then I found a tutorial on how to draw more complex primitives, followed it, and bam, game crashed. After fixing the crash, now this also does nothing. I couldn't get this to work either. I went hunting for other solutions. I found something called monogame.primitives2D, but it's super basic and hasn't been updated in 5 years. Then I found something called apos.shapes, which seemed like the answer to my problems. I added it to my project, and now it doesn't build. I get a vague error about needing to set up shader compilation through Wine. I try to fix it, but it doesn't work. Then I find a shell script that purports to fix it for me. It doesn't work. I try another, and then I try modifying them in various ways. Then I restart my computer, and it works. I don't know what the solution was, but whatever it was didn't tell me to restart. And now, finally, I have apos.shapes working. I translate my code from Java to C# and set up a minimal test. It doesn't work. Oh, I just accidentally set a variable to 0 when it should have been 1. Still doesn't work. Oh, I'm using gametime.elapsedgametime.seconds when I should be using gametime.elapsedgametime.totalseconds. Silly me. Now it works. It's upside down. It took me an embarrassing amount of time to figure out what was causing that. It's just that Monogame's coordinate system is upside down compared to libgdx's, so I need to subtract the top from the bottom rather than the bottom from the top. Okay, now it works. The edges are rounded. I want them to be pointy. I don't really feel like fixing that right now, so for the time being I just ported the chain and bar shapes, which took a while. After resolving some crashes and other errors, it works fine, although the code definitely needs a lot of cleanup, which I'll save for later. All of that took about 6 hours, and that's not even counting the time it took to architect, write, and debug the original Java code, which was the bulk of the time. I finally started to re-implement battles. Most of the mechanics from before should be there, but I haven't tested all of them yet because I know there will be a ton of bugs to fix, and I'm afraid. Lastly, because I have no self-control whatsoever, I added a C# scripting console, but then I realized that this isn't actually useful, so I removed it. The next episode will take longer because I'm now almost caught up with the current state of development. I'm still trying to feel out the right amount of detail, so let me know if you liked or disliked the increased amount of detail in this episode compared to the previous one. Join me next time as I atone for last episode's insults towards Lua and C by rewriting yet again in a new language I invented called Lua C.